Maggie Reeves wiped down a table at Travis Tasty, the roadside diner that sat like a lone matchbox against the vast whiteness of Hilltop, Montana. Outside, the wind hurled snow sideways, the flakes clinging to the glass like frostbitten moths. The hiss of the storm was constant now, seeping through every crack of the old building, whispering through the air vents, coiling like cold fingers around the ankles of anyone near the door. She moved automatically, wiping the same table twice. Her hands were dry and red from the mix of soap and winter air. The clock above the cash register ticked louder than usual. 9:17 p.m. Jake would be asleep by now. Mrs. Dalloway from across the hall had promised to keep an eye on him. She always did. But Maggie still worried. His breathing had been labored again that morning, and the inhaler was nearly empty. She'd counted the puffs left as she packed his school bag. It wasn't how life was supposed to go. Maggie had once been a student at Montana State, pre-med, anatomy flashcards, late-night labs, caffeine-fueled study sessions. She was supposed to be a doctor by now, walking sterile corridors in clean scrubs. Instead, her nights smelled of baking grease and coffee grounds, her dreams replaced by a sun's soft cough through thin apartment walls. Everything had unraveled after the fire. Her husband, David, had been the steady one. A carpenter with strong hands and kind eyes. One faulty gas line and a basement renovation had taken him from her, and with him, the scaffolding of the life they'd built. Now, she existed in pieces. In paycheck-to-paycheck hustles, and budget meals, and tight smiles for regulars who never looked twice. Ellen Browder never asked about her life. She never asked about anyone's. She ran the diner like a drill sergeant, sharp eyes, rules like concrete. No free meals. No loitering. No excuses. The kind of woman who prided herself on fairness, which often meant no mercy. The diner was quiet that night. Just 3 old men in weather-beaten jackets nursing the last of their coffee. They talked in murmurs, the sound low and familiar, tractors, snowplows, a busted fence. Maggie refilled their cups without needing to ask. She stepped behind the counter, reaching for a new stack of receipts, when something outside the front window caught her eye. A small figure stood just beyond the frost-covered glass, barely visible through the fogged pane. Maggie leaned in. The child didn't move, only watched. He was thin. 8, maybe 9. A too-light coat hung off his shoulders, and his dark hair was matted under a damp knit hat. A backpack sagged from one arm, its bottom crusted with ice and mud. His cheeks were red, raw against the cold, his lips slightly parted as he stared at something inside. Maggie followed his gaze to a booth near the window. A customer had left in a hurry, a plate of fries and a half-eaten burger still on the table. Ketchup congealed on the edge of the plate. The boy's eyes locked on the food with such intensity it made Maggie's chest tighten. She looked toward Ellen. The owner was in the back office, behind the cracked door where a space heater hummed low. Maggie hesitated. She knew the rules. But hunger had a look. She had worn it once herself, long ago, when her father lost his job and meals came from church pantries and sympathy. It looked like that, stillness with desperation just beneath it, like a held breath. She walked slowly to the door and opened it. The storm pushed back, flinging cold air into the warmth of the diner. The boy blinked at her, wide-eyed, uncertain whether to run or speak. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice low enough not to carry. "Come inside." "Just for a minute." He didn't answer, but the moment she stepped back, he crossed the threshold, shoulders hunched, as if expecting to be struck. Snow fell from his sleeves in soft clumps. He stood just inside, shivering but silent. Maggie guided him to the far booth, away from the front window, where the heater under the seat would be strongest. He sat with careful movements, as though unsure he belonged on something so soft. She poured him a glass of water. Then she grabbed a clean towel and handed it to him. He didn't speak, but he nodded once. The towel trembled in his hands. From the kitchen came a muffled shout, Ellen calling for updated inventory numbers. Maggie pretended not to hear. She leaned down, kept her voice calm. "Where's your family?" My dad, the boy finally said, voice like paper. We got separated. At the outlet center. I walked. Didn't know where else to go. He pulled a wrinkled index card from his backpack. A phone number written in blue ink. Maggie took it, went to the back where the landline hung, and dialed. It rang 4 times. Then voicemail. She warmed a plate of food left by a customer, the one with the burger and fries. Ellen had told the cook to toss it, but it hadn't reached the trash yet. It wasn't much. But to someone cold and hungry, it might mean everything. When she placed it in front of the boy, he looked up as if unsure if it was truly for him. His fingers moved slowly, reverently. He ate as though afraid someone would take it away. Maggie stood nearby, arms crossed, watching the snow build outside like drifts of silence. She didn't notice Ellen appear until it was too late. The owner's face was sharp, her voice sharper. Her words cut through the room like glass breaking. What is this? Maggie tried to explain. The boy. The food. The weather. But none of it mattered. You know the rules. No free meals. No exceptions. I'll pay for it, Maggie offered. But the damage was done. Take off your apron. You're done. She didn't argue. Just untied the strings at her waist, folded the stained apron, and placed it on the counter. Her name tag clinked softly against the laminate. She looked at the boy, still holding a half-eaten fry. It's okay, she said. You're safe here. And then she walked out into the snow, leaving footprints that would vanish in minutes. But not the memory. Not the moment. Not the eyes that had watched quietly from a corner booth and would remember her name for the rest of his life. The heat from the booth's underseat vent began to spread across the boy's legs, though his damp jeans clung cold to his knees. He ate slowly now, more cautiously than hungrily, like someone used to rationing even small comforts. Maggie watched from outside the diner, the falling snow now softening the edges of the neon sign above her, Travis Tasty, flickering slightly, like even it wasn't sure it should stay open tonight. She hadn't gone far. Just across the lot to her rusted Subaru, where she sat behind the wheel and turned the ignition halfway, not to drive, just to feel a little warmth. Her hands trembled, not from the cold but from the quiet echo of finality in Ellen Browder's voice. Fired. Just like that. No warning. No write-up. No last shift. Years of punctuality, extra hours, covering holidays without complaint, erased in a heartbeat because she couldn't turn away a child in need. Inside the diner, the boy continued to eat with his eyes fixed low, taking in everything and nothing. The silence in the room had changed. The 3 farmers who'd been nursing their coffee had grown unusually still, their muttered conversations replaced by something more uncomfortable. None of them had said a word when Ellen raised her voice. None had moved when Maggie was dismissed. But now, at least one watched the boy with new interest. Ellen stood behind the counter, arms folded, pretending to scroll through the receipt log. But she kept glancing up, jaw tight, as if trying to justify the decision to herself in silence. The boy pushed his plate forward after he finished, wiped his mouth with the back of his sleeve, and stood up. Thank you, he said to no one in particular, voice small and uneven. The bell above the door jingled as it opened again, this time, a uniformed officer stepping in, brushing snow off his shoulders. Officer Ron Kessler, the local night shift patrol. Familiar with everyone. Not easily surprised. He was already reaching for his radio when he spotted the boy. There you are, he said, gently. We've been looking for you. The boy's shoulders sagged, not in fear, but in relief. It was over. The walking. The cold. The hunger. He looked up at the officer, the edges of his eyes red from wind and exhaustion. Come on, kiddo. Let's get you warmed up somewhere better. Maggie, watching from the car, saw the exchange but didn't move. She watched the boy get escorted to the cruiser, watched the blue and red lights blink softly against the snowbanks as the vehicle backed out and disappeared down the road. The image stayed burned in her mind, the way the boy looked over his shoulder one last time. Not at the diner. At her car. Like maybe he understood what had just happened. Like he wouldn't forget it. She waited a while longer before finally driving home. Her apartment smelled like old radiator heat and yesterday's oatmeal. Jake stirred in bed when she tiptoed into his room. His little chest rose and fell steadily, a plastic inhaler on the pillow beside him. She kissed his forehead and sat at the edge of the bed longer than she meant to. At midnight, she finally allowed herself to cry. Across town, Officer Kessler pulled into the small police outpost and guided the boy inside. Warm light, instant noodles, a heavy blanket. The boy gave his name, Tommy. His father, Johnny Larson, hadn't answered the phone yet. But that wasn't unusual, not for someone in his line of work. The boy explained it the best he could. They'd gone to the outlet center earlier that day. His dad stepped into a store, told him to stay close. When Tommy turned around, he was gone. He waited. For an hour. Then 2. Then started walking. Following what little memory he had of the roadways from the last time they'd passed through. He had tried to find the old gas station his father liked, but everything looked different in the dark. The wind had picked up. His hands went numb. I saw the food through the window, he said, wrapping both palms around the steaming cup Officer Kessler handed him. I just wanted to look at it for a minute. He never expected someone to open the door. Meanwhile, the video began to circulate. One of the farmers, Tom Halberd, had quietly recorded the scene on his phone. It wasn't much. A few minutes of footage, a boy at a booth, a waitress warming food, a manager yelling, and a young woman untying her apron without a word. But the internet didn't need much. The silence said everything. By morning, the clip had been uploaded to a regional blog. From there, it was shared on social media: small town justice, kindness punished, dignity in the face of power. The headlines wrote themselves. But Maggie had no idea. She spent the morning drafting a list of the few places still hiring. Gas stations, grocery stores, a daycare in the next town over. She didn't mention anything to Jake. She packed his lunch as usual, told him to zip up his coat tighter, and kissed his cheek as he walked toward the bus. Then she sat in the silence and stared at the cracked tiles on the kitchen floor. It wasn't until late afternoon that someone knocked on her door. A man. Plain jacket, worn jeans, a slight limp in his left leg. She opened the door cautiously. I believe you helped my son, he said, holding up his phone with the video paused on Maggie's face. He introduced himself only as Johnny. He didn't smile, but there was something reverent in the way he looked at her. I wanted to thank you, he said. She didn't know what to say. He seemed to expect that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. I run logistics for a task force out of Billings, he said. Nothing flashy. But we need someone organized. You come recommended. She blinked, confused. By who? Me, he said. And every man and woman who's ever owed a debt to someone kind enough to do the right thing, even when it cost them everything. He handed her the envelope and walked away. Inside was a contact number, a job description, and a note written in careful handwriting. The town of Hilltop rarely saw visitors. Travelers sometimes passed through on their way to bigger places, and delivery trucks rumbled by with no reason to stop. That's why, when a dusty gray pickup truck pulled into the Travis Tasty parking lot just after midnight, its headlights cutting through the swirling snow like a blade, no one paid much attention. No one, except for Ellen Browder, who was still inside, checking the books. The man who stepped out looked more worn than the truck. He moved slowly, stiff from either age or injury, his frame solid beneath a heavy winter coat. His face was unshaven, and his eyes hid behind the kind of tired that doesn't come from one sleepless night, but hundreds. The wind tugged at his collar as he approached the diner door. The closed sign swung lightly on the glass. He opened the door anyway. Ellen looked up sharply. We're closed, she barked, not bothering to stand from the office stool. The man didn't speak. He just nodded once, walked to the counter, and placed something gently on the laminate surface. A small, battered photo. It showed a boy, maybe 8, smiling under the arm of a man who now stood before her. Same dark eyes. Same cautious face. Same backpack, now folded in the truck outside. Ellen narrowed her eyes. "You're the father." He nodded again. "You should thank me," she added, folding her arms. She had no right to. "You don't know who I am," he interrupted. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the diner's silence like a slow, sharp draw of a knife. And he was right. Because for the past 3 months, Johnny Larson had been hiding in plain sight, moving through rural towns under different names, blending in at truck stops, small motels, and highway diners just like Travis Tasty. No one had ever looked twice. That was by design. He was an agent with the Department of Homeland Security. For over a year, he'd been embedded in a deep cover assignment tracing a trafficking network operating through backroad routes and forgotten towns. Hilltop was one of them. Travis Tasty hadn't just been a stop for coffee. It was one of several locations flagged for suspicion, catering contracts, cash movement, and odd accounting tied to a chain of rural businesses. A laundering operation hiding behind burgers and fries. He was supposed to stay invisible. But when his son went missing that day, everything changed. He had taken Tommy with him to the outlet center. The boy had begged to come. Johnny thought he could manage a few hours of work while letting his son wander nearby. It was a mistake. The suspects he'd been tracking appeared unexpectedly, forcing him to act fast, to tail them without breaking cover. When he turned around, Tommy was gone. A panic unlike anything he'd ever felt took hold. Not the fear of blowing his cover or compromising an investigation. Just the raw, human dread of a father who had lost sight of his child. And then, hours later, he learned where Tommy had ended up. Who had helped him. And what price she'd paid. Johnny said nothing to Ellen. No threats. No accusations. Only one final statement before he turned to leave. "I filed a request. We're done here." He walked out without looking back. The next morning, Hilltop woke to the sight of 3 black SUVs idling outside Travis Tasty. Men and women in civilian coats but with the unmistakable bearing of federal agents entered the building in silence. They carried clipboards, laptops, and a sealed warrant. Ellen was still at the counter, coffee in hand. She didn't speak as they approached. But her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She was escorted to the office while agents began pulling files, ledgers, and receipts. The search warrant named multiple businesses, some in Montana, others across state lines, each linked by a shared accountant and suspicious transfers. Shell companies. Phantom suppliers. Overstated payrolls. Ellen claimed ignorance. Said the books were handled off-site. But the trail was too clean, too consistent. Whether she was complicit or careless, the damage was done. The evidence would speak. Out front, the townspeople gathered. No one had told them to come. But word had spread. About the child. The video. The firing. The silence that followed. Tom Halberd, the old farmer who'd filmed the incident, stood on the curb with a thermos in hand. Next to him was Marcy Pritchard, who taught 3rd grade at Hilltop Elementary, the school where Tommy Larson had just enrolled. They watched as boxes were carried out, Ellen trailing behind, her mouth pressed tight. No one said a word. Across town, Maggie Reeves was kneeling on her kitchen floor, sorting the contents of the envelope Johnny had left. Inside were papers detailing a short-term administrative position in Billings, entry-level work helping with records, inventory, coordination. Not a glamorous role. But steady. With benefits. With purpose. She could do it. She would do it. That evening, Jake returned from school with a drawing in his hand, a picture of 2 kids sitting in a booth, steam rising from their plates, a window showing snowflakes falling outside. One of the boys was holding a fork in midair. The other looked like Jake himself. At the top, he had written, "Thank you for being nice to my new friend." Maggie held it for a long time. Not because it was perfect, but because it felt like the first thread of something whole. Later, as she washed dishes with Jake humming softly behind her, she turned on the radio. It was a local station, mostly farm reports and weather updates. But today, there was a mention, brief and passing. Federal agents executed a search of a Hilltop business earlier today in connection to a multi-state investigation into financial irregularities. The name of the establishment has not yet been formally released. They didn't need to say it. Everyone already knew. And Maggie? She dried her hands, picked up the drawing again, and smiled. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come with sirens. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, on snow-covered boots, and tired eyes, or in a simple thank you from a child you barely know. And that's enough. The office in Billings was nothing like the diner. No sizzle of bacon, no bells above doors, no coffee-stained menus. Just gray walls, stacks of binders, and the low hum of computers. But for Maggie Reeves, it was a cathedral of peace. She started quietly, careful not to take up space. Her first task was filing backlog reports, 6 months of handwritten transport manifests from a joint task force handling rural trafficking investigations. Not thrilling, not prestigious. But honest work. Steady. Predictable. At the end of each day, she returned home with clean hands and the knowledge that she had contributed to something larger than herself. She was paid through a grant tied to community engagement. Johnny Larson had found a loophole to make it happen. Officially, she was support staff. Unofficially, she was the reason half the team smiled in the morning. The others didn't ask much at first. They were agents, analysts, support techs, used to rotating faces and classified files. But Maggie's quiet competence won them over. She noticed small things, a missed decimal, a mislabeled box, a misfiled name that led to a breakthrough in one case. She had an instinct for detail. And a way of speaking softly, even when the weight of the job pressed on everyone. Jake adjusted too. His first day at the new school was rough, new faces, new rules. But that changed when Tommy Larson spotted him at recess. The boys were different in age but kindred in experience. Tommy had told his father about Jake. And Johnny had told the task force. By the end of the week, Maggie had more people watching over her family than she ever imagined. One Friday afternoon, as she sorted files in the back room, Johnny approached with something in his hand. "I thought you should have this," he said, handing her a small laminated plaque. It was a still frame from the viral video. Maggie, her back turned to the camera, setting the plate in front of Tommy. A moment of action caught in the quietest posture, no drama, no fanfare. Just kindness. Beneath the photo, 4 words. Kindness doesn't ask permission. She stared at it for a long moment, unsure how to respond. Johnny only nodded, then returned to his desk. Weeks passed. The snow began to melt. Jake's wheeze faded with the coming spring. Maggie found herself arriving early just to organize the common room, brewing coffee before others arrived. She knew who took 2 sugars, who liked their documents stapled, who needed a gentle reminder when birthdays approached. It wasn't just work. It was a rhythm. Hilltop changed too, in its own slow, stumbling way. Travis Tasty remained shuttered for weeks, its neon sign cracked and dark. Rumors swirled, about laundering, about indictments, about Ellen selling off assets to cover legal fees. Some said she left town. Others said she stayed, defiant to the end. Either way, she never reopened. Eventually, the building was sold. The new owner was a retired police officer named Frank Delaney. He'd worked with Johnny once during a training detail. After buying the property at auction, he gutted it, painted it pale yellow, and replaced the weather-worn booths. The sign changed too. The kind table. Below the name, painted in bold white letters. Pay if you can. Eat if you're hungry. Inside, one wall was covered in handwritten notes, small thank you cards from travelers, neighbors, and families. Another wall displayed prepaid meal tokens. Locals started buying them quietly, enough for single moms, seniors on fixed income, or anyone who walked in with more need than cash. But the most striking piece in the room hung above booth number 3, where Tommy had once sat with frostbitten fingers and a silent hunger. It was the original photo from that winter night, enlarged, framed. 2 children with steaming plates, their laughter visible through the rising curls of cocoa. No one looking at the camera. No one performing. Just being. A brass plaque beneath it read, "In honor of those who feed without asking why." Visitors came from other towns just to see it. Maggie never returned to the diner. Not officially. But one afternoon, passing through Hilltop with Jake, they stopped in front of it. The bell above the door jingled from someone else going in. She watched as a woman offered her meal token to a young man in line. A small act, but the kind that ripples forever. Jake tugged her sleeve. "Is this where you helped Tommy?" She nodded. "Do they know it was you?" "It doesn't matter," she said. And she meant it. Back in Billings, Maggie continued her quiet work. She took night classes eventually, not medicine, but social work. She had seen enough hurt to know how much healing happens when someone simply listens. Her file cabinet grew with thank you notes from agents, teachers, community partners. She never sought recognition. But one morning, she arrived at her desk to find a small coin resting on her keyboard. A challenge coin. Bronze. Simple engraving. For service beyond the uniform. No note. Just a coin. She kept it in her purse, next to Jake's inhaler and a folded copy of his drawing. Her new anchors. And the plaque Johnny had given her stayed on her wall at home, beside a calendar marked with only one phrase, repeated each month. Kindness without question is enough. That was her new routine. Not survival. Not sacrifice. But quiet strength, day after day. And in every quiet moment, she carried the truth that had changed her life. One act of compassion, one plate of food, can undo years of silence, change the course of a stranger's life, and rebuild a soul that thought it had been forgotten. Even in the coldest places, kindness plants something that grows. Always.